Sophia Lambert was 28. She stood in the grand ballroom of a billionaire's New York estate, smoothing down her apron, a heavy silver platter anchored in her hands. All around her, the city's razor-thin elite glittered and preened. Sophia's soft, plus-size frame stood in stark contrast to them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the marble floor, not out of submission, but out of habit. She had spent her whole life trying to shrink herself in rooms that judged her for her size. For 3 years, she'd quietly cared for the estate's children. She polished crystal. She kept the door to her private life locked tight. To the rest of the staff, she was just the clumsy, oversized girl hiding inside a tailored uniform. None of them knew where she went every Tuesday night. After her shift ended, Sophia slipped away to a sign language academy on the edge of the city. She was learning to sign for one reason: to stay connected to her little sister, Chloe, whose world had gone silent after a childhood accident. That's why, when Julian, the estate's spiteful supervisor, ordered her to personally serve the most powerful guest at the gala, Sophia felt only dread. Around her, the other staff smirked. They'd already decided how this night would end for her. The guest was Alberto Contreras, 33 years old, broad-shouldered, striking. Dark hair framed a jawline that looked carved from years in the shadows. His black suit radiated command, and his eyes, perfectly still, seemed to freeze the room around him. High society whispered that he ruled the East Coast shipping underworld. He always sat alone. He spent staggering sums without blinking, and he never responded, not one word, to anyone who tried to win his favor. The gossip columns called him a tyrant. Some even claimed his deafness was fake, a power move, a way to look down on everyone else. That rumor was exactly the trap Julian had set: push the self-conscious Nanny straight into the path of the underworld monster, then watch her fall apart in front of everyone. Sophia's shoes felt too tight against the marble as Julian steered her toward the head table. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "Table 12. Alone. Don't embarrass us." A few of the other staff exchanged glances behind him. Someone stifled a laugh. Sophia said nothing. She never did. She gripped the platter tighter and walked. The ballroom noise seemed to fade with every step. The clinking glasses, the practiced laughter, the orchestra tuning in the corner. All of it dimmed, until there was only the long walk toward the man everyone feared. Alberto Contreras sat at the head of the table, like a storm waiting to break. No guest had dared approach him all evening. Even the waiters assigned to his section had found excuses to avoid his corner. Sophia stopped a few feet away. She set the platter down gently, careful not to let the silverware clatter. Alberto didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his gaze moved over her, the way a man studies something he expects to be a problem. Sophia felt the old instinct rise in her chest, the urge to shrink, to apologize for existing in his eyeline. She swallowed it down. Then she lifted her hands. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, shaped by 2 years of Tuesday nights she'd never told a soul about. For a moment, nothing happened. Alberto simply stared at her hands, as if they belonged to someone else, as if the gesture itself had reached across a distance he'd stopped expecting anyone to cross. Then his eyes lifted to hers. Something shifted behind that famous stillness. Not anger, not the icy dismissal the gossip columns promised. Something closer to disbelief. He signed back. Just one word. "Where?" Across the room, Julian's smug grin had frozen into confusion. He leaned toward another supervisor, whispering, craning his neck to understand what he was watching. The joke he'd engineered wasn't landing the way he'd planned. Sophia didn't notice him. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't thinking about the eyes on her body or the smirks at her back. She was watching a man the whole city called a monster look at her like she'd just handed him something he thought he'd lost forever. The staff quarters were quiet by the time Sophia climbed the narrow back stairs, her feet aching, her mind still tangled in the memory of a stranger's hands asking where. She eased the door open slowly, the way she'd trained herself to over the years, and found Chloe curled beneath the thin blanket, one arm flung over her face, breathing steady and deep. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, just watching her sleep. 11 years had passed since the accident, but some nights, it still felt like no time had passed at all. She could close her eyes and be back in that car. The smell of rain on the windshield, her mother humming along to the radio, her father's laugh cut short by the scream of metal against metal. Sophia had been 16. Chloe had been 7. She remembered waking up in the hospital, her ribs wrapped tight, and being wheeled down the hall to see her sister. Small, bandaged, silent. Not silent from shock. Silent because the world itself had gone quiet around her, and it would never come back. The doctors had used careful words. Profound hearing loss. Irreversible. Sophia hadn't understood any of it, except one thing. Her sister was still there. Still scared. Still hers to protect. And she had no way to tell her it would be okay. So she learned. Night classes, library books, secondhand videos watched on repeat, until her hands ached from mimicking the shapes. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. But slowly, a bridge began to form between two sisters who'd lost everything else. Sign language hadn't just become a skill, it became the last unbroken thread tying them to the family they used to be. Proof that love could still travel between them, even when sound couldn't. Sophia reached out now and smoothed a strand of hair from Chloe's forehead. Her sister stirred but didn't wake. You have no idea, Sophia thought, what your hands taught me to do tonight. For years, she'd kept this language hidden, tucked away like something too precious to risk, in a world that already found so much to mock about her. Tonight, for one unexpected moment, it had reached someone else entirely. Sophia turned off the lamp and let the dark settle over them both. The silence between them warm instead of empty. Tuesday nights belonged to no one but Sophia. The academy sat above a laundromat on the edge of the city, its windows fogged with steam from the machines below, its classroom lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that buzzed faintly through every session. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't need to be. For 2 hours each week, Sophia wasn't the clumsy nanny hiding in a tailored uniform. She was simply a woman with quick hands and a hunger to get better. Her instructor, an older deaf woman named Marguerite, had a way of correcting Sophia's form with a raised eyebrow rather than words. A small tilt of the head that said again, slower, from the shoulder, not the wrist. Sophia soaked in every note like it was oxygen. She never told anyone at the estate where she went on Tuesdays. It wasn't shame, it was protection. This language had cost her too much, too many nights of aching hands, and too many years of grief folded into every motion, to hand it over to people who'd only ever used her body as a punchline. Some things had to stay hers, untouched, unmocked. But something had shifted since the gala. Alberto had begun requesting her by name for his visits to the estate, never explaining why, never needing to. Julian grumbled about it, but didn't dare refuse a man his employer clearly wanted kept happy. So twice a week, sometimes 3 times, Sophia found herself setting a private table for one silent, watchful man, who no longer felt like a stranger. Their conversations grew easy, in a way she hadn't expected. He signed dry observations about the gala guests he despised. She signed back sharper ones, surprising a low, rare laugh out of him more than once. He asked about her day. She asked, carefully, about his. There was no performance in it, no apron-deep nervousness. Just 2 people who'd learned, in different ways, how to survive a world that didn't wait for them to catch up. Sophia caught herself smiling on her walk back to the academy one week, replaying something Alberto had signed the night before. Something sharp and funny about the estate's insufferable string quartet. She didn't examine the feeling too closely. She wasn't ready to name it. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Tuesday nights weren't the only hours she felt fully seen. Sophia had come down to the industrial kitchen for a pitcher of water. Nothing more. She hadn't meant to stop outside the swinging door. But Julian's voice carried, sharp and pleased with itself, and something in his tone made her feet root to the floor. You should have seen her face, he was saying, and a ripple of laughter answered him. I picked her on purpose. Big girl, no confidence. Figured he'd take one look and send her crying back to the kitchen. Best joke I've pulled all year. More laughter. Someone, Sophia thought it might be one of the newer maids, said something about the mute Mafia guy that made her stomach turn. He's not mute, Julian corrected, delighted. He just pretends he's deaf, so he doesn't have to talk to people he thinks are beneath him. Power move. My cousin works security for one of his rivals. He told me the whole thing's an act. Sophia stood frozen, the pitcher forgotten in her hand. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been Julian simply reaching for the nearest warm body to hand off an unwanted table. He had chosen her, measured her insecurity, her size, her quiet nature, and built a trap around it, hoping to watch her break in front of a room full of strangers. And it wasn't only her he'd used as a punchline. Alberto's deafness, the thing he guarded so fiercely, the thing that made him vulnerable, in a world that punished vulnerability, had been reduced to gossip. A rumor, a joke passed around a kitchen by people who had no idea what it cost him to walk through that ballroom with his head high every single night. Something hot and unfamiliar rose in Sophia's chest. It wasn't the old shame, the old instinct to shrink and disappear. This was different, sharper. It had teeth. She thought of Chloe, asleep upstairs. She thought of 2 years of Tuesday nights, of Alberto's hands moving across the table with dry humor and quiet trust, of a stillness in his eyes that had never once, not for a second, looked fake to her. They had turned his private pain into a punchline. They had turned her body into a weapon against her. Sophia set the pitcher down without a sound, her hands steady now, her mind made up. She would not let this go unanswered. Alberto's next visit came on a Thursday, the estate quiet except for the low hum of the kitchens below. Sophia arrived with his usual tray, expecting the familiar rhythm of dry jokes and easy silence. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he signed. "Please." She hesitated only a moment before setting the tray down and lowering herself into the seat, her pulse quick. In 2 years of Tuesday nights and weeks of these private dinners, he had never once broken the invisible line between them. Alberto studied his hands for a long moment before he began. "I was 9, he signed. "My parents took me to a meeting they shouldn't have taken me to. A car bomb, meant for my father. I don't remember the sound. I remember the after. The ringing that never stopped. And then nothing. Just silence. Forever." Sophia's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't dare interrupt the fragile shape of what he was giving her. The doctors said the blast damaged everything sound needs to reach the brain. There was no fixing it. I was 9 years old, and the 2 people who loved me were gone, and the world went quiet at the exact same moment. He paused, his jaw tightening in that way she'd learned meant he was choosing his next words carefully. "I inherited everything my father built, all of it, the legitimate parts, and the parts that weren't. In that world, weakness gets you killed. So I let people believe what was easier for them to believe. Better a tyrant who chooses silence than a boy who lost his hearing in the fire that killed his parents." Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, wide and aching. "They think you fake it. To look down on them. Let them," he signed, something hard flickering behind his eyes. "If my enemies believed I couldn't hear a threat coming, they'd already be testing me. My silence keeps me alive. It always has." Sophia reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could see the gesture meant something. "You don't have to guard it with me," she signed slowly. For the first time since she'd known him, Alberto's carefully built stillness wavered completely. Not from fear, but from something gentler, something he clearly hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. Julian's mood soured with each passing week. What had started as a cruel joke had backfired in a way he couldn't control. Alberto Contreras, the man who never asked for anything, who barely acknowledged the existence of the staff who fawned over him, now requested Sophia by name for every visit. Not another maid. Not the senior staff Julian usually paraded in front of important guests. Sophia. It grated on him in a way he wouldn't admit out loud. So instead, he found other ways to let it out. The staff group chat had always been a place for petty complaints and gossip, but Julian's messages began to take on a sharper edge. Comments about Sophia's weight, Comments about what a man like Alberto Contreras could possibly want with someone like her, laced with insinuations meant to humiliate rather than question. He framed it as jokes. He always did, but everyone in the chat understood exactly what he meant, and exactly who it was meant to hurt. Some of the staff laughed along, the way they always had. It was easier than pushing back. Elena wasn't laughing anymore. She'd been part of the group that smirked in the ballroom the night of the gala, part of the crowd that had waited, almost gleefully, to watch Sophia unravel. At the time it had felt harmless, just staff room mischief, a way to pass a long shift. But something had shifted in Elena since that night. Something she couldn't quite name until Julian's messages kept lighting up her phone. She thought of Sophia's face that evening. Not broken, not humiliated, but calm in a way none of them had expected. She thought about how wrong they'd all been about what would happen, and how none of that had stopped them from hoping for her downfall anyway. Now, reading Julian's latest message, something crude about Sophia trapping a man who could buy and sell the entire estate, Elena felt sick in a way she hadn't let herself feel before. She didn't respond. She didn't defend Sophia either. She just set her phone face down on the counter and stared at the wall, guilt curling tight and heavy in her chest. She kept thinking about the sound of her own laughter that night in the ballroom, and how long it had taken her to realize exactly what she'd been laughing at. The wine cellar was cold and narrow, lined floor to ceiling, with dust-covered bottles, and Julian had chosen it deliberately. He caught Sophia there, while she was pulling inventory for the evening service, and he blocked the only path back to the stairs. "You think you're something now," he said, his voice low, all pretense of charm gone. "Because a mafia boss lets you sit with him. You think that changes what you are." Sophia straightened, the crate in her hands suddenly heavy. "Move, Julian. I set you up," he said, almost proud of it. "Did you figure that out yet? I picked you because I knew exactly what would happen. Big, awkward, invisible. I thought he'd throw you out of that ballroom in front of everyone." He smiled, thin and mean. "Guess I miscalculated." Something in Sophia went very still, not the old stillness of shrinking, but something new, something steady. "You spent weeks building a joke out of my body," she said quietly. "You spent weeks making his deafness a punchline in a group chat full of people who don't know a single thing about what he survived to still be standing. You did that because it made you feel powerful. It doesn't. It just makes you cruel." Julian's jaw tightened, but Sophia didn't stop. "I have spent my whole life being told I take up too much space. By people like you. By people who think a body is something to apologize for. I stopped apologizing a long time ago. For my size, for my sister's silence, for surviving things you'll never understand. You don't get to make either of those things a joke. Not anymore." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. "Move," she said again, "or I will make sure everyone in that house knows exactly what you did, and exactly why you did it." For the first time, Julian stepped aside. Sophia walked past him without looking back, her hands steady around the crate, her spine straighter than it had been in years. In the shadow of the cellar stairs, Elena stood frozen, having come down for a case of glasses and finding herself unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to look away. She thought of her own silence in that group chat, her own laughter in the ballroom. Shame settled over her like a weight she finally understood she deserved to carry, until she decided to do something about it. Julian's humiliation in the wine cellar festered into something reckless. 2 nights later, drinking with a group of men he barely knew at a bar near the estate, he found himself boasting about the mafia boss he supposedly had leverage over, about connections he didn't actually have, about being untouchable because of who he served drinks to on the weekends. It was empty talk, the kind men like Julian used to feel important. He never expected it to travel anywhere. He was wrong. 2 days later, a black car idled outside the estate's staff entrance. Sophia noticed it first from the second-floor window while folding linens, and something about its stillness made her stomach tighten before she understood why. 2 men stepped out. Dark suits, unhurried movements, the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to be loud to be terrifying. They found Julian near the delivery entrance, and said something to him Sofia couldn't hear. She didn't need to. She watched the color drain from his face, watched him nod rapidly, watched his hands tremble as he backed toward the wall. It lasted less than 2 minutes. Then the men left as calmly as they'd arrived. Sofia stood frozen at the window long after the car pulled away, a cold understanding settling over her. She had known, in an abstract way, what Alberto's world really was. She had let herself set that knowledge aside during their quiet dinners, their easy jokes, the gentleness that lived behind his stillness. Watching Julian shake like that reminded her the danger was never abstract at all. That evening, when she set Alberto's tray down, she found she couldn't quite meet his eyes. He noticed immediately. "Tell me," he signed. She hesitated, then told him everything. The group chat, the cellar, Julian's boasting, the men outside the delivery entrance. Alberto's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went sharp and cold. "I heard," he signed simply. "I know what he did to you. What he's still doing." He paused, his hands steady, his meaning unmistakable. "Say the word, and he disappears. Tonight. No one asks questions. No one ever finds him." He wasn't posturing. Sofia understood that immediately, with a chill that settled deep in her chest. He meant it completely. For 4 days, Sofia carried Alberto's offer like a stone in her chest. It would have been easy to say yes. Julian's cruelty had earned itself a reckoning, and some small, exhausted part of her wanted the problem simply gone. But every time she pictured the black car, the men in dark suits, Julian's trembling hands, she thought of Chloe. She thought of what it would mean to build her sister's safety on something violent and unspoken. On the 5th evening, she sat across from Alberto and gave him her answer. "No," she signed, steady and certain. "I won't let you become a weapon for my anger. You're not a monster the world made you into. You're a man. I want to keep seeing you that way." Alberto studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his stillness. Then, slowly, he nodded, not in defeat, but in something closer to relief. He didn't argue. He never brought up Julian again. He didn't have to. 3 days later, Elena walked into the estate manager's office with her phone in hand, screenshots of Julian's messages, records of falsified expense reports she'd stumbled across months earlier and been too afraid to report. She laid it all out without flinching, her voice shaking, but her resolve unbroken. Julian was escorted off the property before lunch, his protests swallowed by the same staff who had once laughed along with him. Sofia never asked Alberto if he'd had anything to do with it. She didn't need to. Some victories, she was learning, could be won without violence at all. Months passed. The estate settled into a quieter rhythm. Alberto's visits became something the staff simply accepted rather than whispered about, and the rumors that once followed him seemed to fade into something closer to respect. One afternoon, Sofia opened a letter addressed to Chloe, an acceptance, fully funded, to a specialized academy for the deaf, with resources Sofia could never have afforded on her own. No card, no name. She didn't need one. That evening, at the same long dining table where it had all begun, Sofia sat across from Alberto. No apron between them now. No platter. No audience in the shadows. Neither of them signed anything for a long while. The silence stretched between them, unhurried and warm. No longer the isolation Alberto had guarded for so long, and no longer the invisibility Sofia had spent her life trying to disappear into. Just 2 people, finally seen, sharing the most beautiful silence either of them had ever known.